panel to everyone in the room as well. So we are just starting our last panel. So I'm very excited actually to welcome our last full panel session for today. And we are very, very honored to be joined by Karsten, Halid, Diego, Agnes, Zsofia, and we also will be having Sasja joining a little bit later to dive into this idea of circularity and value creation. So Karsten, I will turn it over to you to kick things off and for the whole team. So looking forward to your presentations and discussions.
So, konnichiwa, good afternoon, good morning, in which time zone you are currently located. And I have the great honor to be accompanied by really a great lineup of thought leaders right at my side. And it's been a very, very long day, and I think your energy level might already be a little bit low. So I try to make it quite energetic to wake you up after a long day of presentations, lectures, and thoughtful ideas. And my panelist, my distinguished panelist, and probably I start with the ladies first, is Agnes Zsofia Nagy. She's a co-founder and a supply chain advisor for Supplyzory in Zurich. So greetings to Switzerland. And she has a very, very strong background, especially in fast-moving consumer goods and in pharma and healthcare. So she worked as a supply chain director at Novo Nordisk. She worked at GlaxoSmithKline Beecham. She worked for Unilever, Nestle, and Coca-Cola. So probably all the major brands that we know when we go shopping. And she was a principal for supply chain management, but now running her own business and consulting companies in and around the world. So Agnes, great to have you on the panel, and I'm looking forward especially to know some use cases when we jump into fast-moving consumer goods and pharma, where we might have maybe specific requirements in terms of food and sterility and other things. Next
Absolutely,
one on the
pleasure to
line
be here.
is...
Thank you.
Oh, so of course, sorry. So then Diego, the next in line. So we are now moving on to UK, and Diego is my distinguished co-host. So he's a research and impact fellow at the University of Exeter. He has a strong background as a senior analyst from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is not only looking for human rights, which I learned, but is looking on financials as well. He has a PhD in logistics and operations from Cardiff, worked at the Bank of Mexico, and did lots of financial and risk analysis. So greetings to UK. Diego, I'm great to have you with us.
Likewise, yeah, thank you, Karsten. Looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, so now, last but not least, we have Dr. Halid Abu-Bakar, and we are jumping to UK as well. And probably he's a research fellow at the University of Exeter. Prior to this, he worked as a senior associate at the University of Cambridge, which is, of course, quite well known. And he is our data guy. So if we have to have something on data, on, I don't know, quality of data analytics, probably he will be the one to talk to. And he did this especially at the Cranfield University, which is a highly recognized university when it comes to the field of logistics. So Halid, great to have you with us. Greetings to UK.
Thank you very much, Karsten. Thank you. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, and last but not least, we will have Sasja Beslik with us. He's the Chief Investment Officer located in Japan, and probably he will jump in something like 20-25 minutes, and I will do a brief introduction when he comes in. and probably he's a chief investment officer. So he really represents the investor guide, the stakeholder guide, the financial, the sustainable finance perspective. And he was working for different stakeholders as a chief investment officer, head of sustainability, sustainable finance in Zurich, in Stockholm, in Japan, and he was even working, I would say, for the so-called enemy, so for one of the big polluters like British Petrol. And as a fun fact, and I know Sasja for quite some time, but I wasn't aware that he was a journalist and even a war correspondent. So this is probably why he's always so much on the point, and he is really not shying away from asking really some tricky questions. So this is the introduction of the great panel, and maybe as a quick opener. We are living in a finite world with finite resources, but we are always looking for constant growth. And probably this will not work. And of course, we know this not only from the Club of Rome, the publication in 1972, the limits of global growth. Probably we have to reuse our resources, otherwise it simply will not work. But 1972 is already a couple of years away. And maybe a quick statement, maybe from my panelists, where are we currently now in terms of circularity? Still at the very beginning, or what is your point of view? So maybe Agnes, you can kick it off.
I can certainly do that, Karsten. Working in the industry directly every day, I can only confirm to you that probably everybody suspected is that we try to push a lot of solutions, but we are still at the beginning, I would say, compared to my expectations as a professional. But we've made progress, right? At the same time, what I think is missing is really a structural change to both the approach of how we think about circularity, as well as a structural approach to how we think about infrastructure behind globally and governance globally. As long as we do not join these things on a global scale, as much as our supply chains and our economies are now global, right? We cannot talk about localized solutions only. We will continue having a problem, right? So that's what I see every day, unfortunately. And if you asked me this question just a month ago, I would have only stopped here. But unfortunately, a few weeks ago, a couple of tariffs and other things have hit the scene, right? And unfortunately, most of the companies shifted focus 100% at the moment. So I would say it's survival of the fittest as a game, or not so much of a game, came into play as well here. I hand over to the others as well, but I think that sums up how we feel and where we are at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. So Diego, what is your take? How do things look in the UK, or from a broader from your experience and perspective?
Yeah, well, it was interesting that you started with this whole Club of Rome approach, the systems thinking approach, which is something that, at least when I was working at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, was something they were trying to push. They work with a lot of companies, and they try to push for specific circular business models. And I think, the educational part is there. Like, people already know what circular economy is about. They're exploring. They have ran different pilots. But then it comes to this part where you see that you need to scale up those things. And we've seen it in a few different sectors. Fast fashion was one of them. That you see that the companies run pilots, but then they are basically competing with their own sales, because they have this linear sales approach, and then you have like this resale rental models that might be difficult to establish, for a big company. Normally you have challenger companies that come and try to break that kind of silo. And I agree with Agnes in terms of like how companies are looking at their supply chains. They are very much siloed. In a way, they are facing their own challenges. So that's something that I think a collaborative approach is needed here. And it's not only from a private perspective. This is something from like the work that we were doing on the finance side. We're looking at public-private partnerships. And that was something that, you know, from a risk perspective, because that's one of the like biggest things. And this probably, you know, lead the way towards Halid and Sasja in terms of like what's relevant from a risk perspective to actually invest first and scale up this kind of business models. I think we lost Karsten, as he mentioned, but he'll come back. Maybe Halid, do you want to continue on how do you see this, maybe from a public sector perspective or wider approach?
Thank you, Diego, and nice to meet you, colleagues. Hi, hello, Sasja, nice to meet you. So I think my take on this is absolutely, it echoes what both of you said, Agnes, what you said as well. So circularity is still very much in its infancy, and there's a lot of fragmentation and confusion because the theory says one thing, but then what actually happens in practical terms is a completely different picture. For example, if we took the global value chain, if we say take, for example, the automotive industry, a car, for example, is made of several components, several parts, right? And each of these components requires sort of circularity, if you like, in its own right. But then we see the car as one entity, okay? Now, the supply chains or the different value chains that contribute to all of these individual parts that make up one unit, they need to be disaggregated. We need to disaggregate this entire thing and look into it individually. If you look at policies, for example, there are different, it's so fragmented. For example, the EU comes up with the policies which is only binding within the EU. And even within the EU itself, there are countries that have got their own policies that do not talk to the overarching policy sort of infrastructure. And if you expand this to a regional approach, it's exactly the same thing. And I wouldn't even touch the global outlook, if you like. For example, the global North versus the global South, circularity manifests completely differently in the global North as it does in the global South. The motivations behind the development of circular economy strategies, policies are completely different, right? Some would look at it from an economic perspective, others would look at it from an environmental perspective, and generally, I think the social side of circularity is very, very largely ignored if you look at it pretty much everywhere in the world. So there is I would say, a very significant fragmented approach to circularity. So this has to be looked into. We know the circularity is a whole system concept, but then I don't think that we have actually developed enough to be able to tackle all of these systemic issues with circularity from that sort of whole system perspective. So there is a lot to be done in that regard.
Totally, I agree. That that's something where people have to get connected and maybe run some larger pilots within like national level, which some countries have been trying to do that from a policy perspective, right? By the way, welcome, Sasja. We lost Karsten, but he told us that you would be coming in at some point, and we're right now discussing. Oh, he's back, I think. We're discussing, you know, what is like this kind of like systems approach to circularity within the different sectors, and from our experience, what is needed to kind of like push and move things forward. I don't know what's if you want to elaborate on that.
Thank you very much for the invite. Sorry, I was a bit late. Look, I'm investor, so from my perspective, circularity as the way or the means to strengthen resilience that company have or certain sectors have to tackle challenges we have ahead, both sort of a material, environmental, climate-related challenges, but also financial challenges, is very important. But the core sort of a as investor, the core question I have is that, how do we create value creation? I mean, how do you actually create value out of circularity that transfers into very simple into financial profit? Because if the circularity models as they are today are developed, I would say very often in a very isolated way, and I agree with the previous speaker on the systemic approach. Then we have very big challenges to actually evaluate that as investors, because we actually don't know how this would work in another geography or in another part of the system. Then the other problem or challenge, I think, in general in circularity is that the price of externalities is not really included in non-circularity business models, which makes them stand out on a financial sort of angle, but in the same time, the real cost is not covered. So if circularity business models are to sort of succeed in the way, how I think they could, then this sort of a hidden cost of externalities, of course, needs to be part of the equation, how they evaluate it. Yeah.
So, and I see that Sasja has joined us. So, Sasja, great to see you. And let's say preparing a panel like this is always a pleasure, because I wasn't aware that you have been a war correspondent and a journalist, which makes it crystal clear for me why you are so much on the point, and that you are, let's say, moving away from all this blah blah greenwashing, but straight to shoot to the point and say, show me your sustainability, show me your figures, show me your prices, and let all this, I don't know, gibberish out. So if I just jump in and out, that's not, let's say, a bad purpose. This is just my very fragile internet connection here. And I already informed my panel before, so don't hesitate if I'm jumping on and off. It's just my internet connection. And so I have probably not, let's say, been in the conversation for the entire time. But Sasja, as we have seen your analysis in Athens this year, I know that you are really looking on companies in terms of really what they do in terms of profitability, what they do in terms of sustainability, and what they do in terms of revenue or growth or innovation. And most of the time you say there are really three different silos. You do A, you do B, you do C, but these things are not even connected at all. Having a look at your vast experience, is circularity a topic for any of your analyzed companies?
Karsten, thank you very much for the very nice intro. Yes, we are looking, and as I mentioned before, I'm an investor. I'm managing the Next Gen ESG Japan. It's a fund strategy investing in mid-cap companies in Japan on the listed equity side. There are a number of companies in my portfolio. It's a very focused portfolio. I invest only in 27 companies that I picked 3 years ago, which I believe have a great potential. And there are bits and pieces of circularity valuation that we do, especially in companies that are B2B, where there are, I would say, tech segments of the companies, where we're really trying to understand how the companies, let me give you an example, let me be very concrete. I'm investing in a semiconductor company that is serving automotive industry, and instead of selling semiconductors, there is idea that this company could actually just rent the semiconductors to replace them, to take them back, sort of process them, and then rent them back again. So it's a new model, very interesting model, which is covering the part of their business, but as such would make a fantastic, phenomenal financial gain for the company going forward. So there are ways. We don't need to think only about new circularity models as they are. We also could think sometimes that there are bits and pieces of the businesses within the existing businesses that could shift gears towards the circularity. And that's probably the easiest way to sort of get the buy-in on the corporate side to really make this happen, because that's very often one of the biggest problems, because what you actually do is that you challenge the entire business model. If you do circularity as such, you're challenging the existing business models and incentive models. So, yeah.
So we are rather going to some kind of, I don't know, programming power or chip power as a service. So if you go more in these as a service models, you are going more probably going more circular by definition.
Yeah, I think, given the constraints we are seeing in terms of the raw material sourcing, especially in the segments of the world that are growing, including the new sort of a wave on artificial intelligence and all of these other things. But I mean, if you go to the renewable energy side, battery storage, all these other things happening, the circularity angle of these existing business models has a huge, huge value for these companies. And it's still not being priced in. So this is the sort of the next way of sort of a pricing the sustainability as a part of the, how companies actually include circularity models in what they already do. And with that said, I mean, I need to be clear on that. Again, what I said earlier, externalities are not priced. So this is creating a bit of a challenge for companies themselves. Yeah.
If I can just comment on that, because we're doing a work on digital technologies, data centers, and consumer electronics at Exeter University. And yeah, we've been looking at hardware as a service as one of the options. Of course, you have those other risks about like critical raw materials, and how does that create, this kind of paradox theory where you're like solving one problem but creating another, in terms of the sourcing. And if you look at that from a supply chain risk perspective, which probably Agnes would know more about this, it's quite relevant. I know that in Japan, for example, the Japanese have been trying to localize a lot of their economy to reduce this kind of risk. But it was something that we've been exploring as well, like how do you actually create that renewable side of things? And it's not only about like the supplier perspective, but how do you actually, from a data center perspective, for example, you create all this waste heat, and then you put it back to the grid, but then like the grid is not ready to receive it, and you need batteries to do that. So it's like a little bits and pieces that are interconnected, and you need like, okay, what's the best approach to do this? And certainly having companies like that are offering chips as a service, cooling as a service, distribution, and batteries that could help localize communities without affecting the resource availability of them. Like we've seen in the US, that's been a big problem that has been happening with all this new development by hyperscalers. So they are like very much local communities are afraid of the environmental impact that this kind of new developments might have.
And Agnes, you talked something, or you mentioned something about infrastructure. So maybe, or I see Halid, you raised your hand. Maybe you would like to comment on this as well, Halid.
Go ahead, Halid, please, and I'll join you after that. Go
Thank
for
you.
it.
No, thank you. No, just to again echo what the previous my previous colleagues actually highlighted with regards to the quantification of some of the externalities. That the introduction of circularity actually naturally comes with. These things are often overlooked. Okay, I don't know if I'm sure you're familiar with the story of Emmanuel Faber, of Denon, and some of the sort of the way that he tried to revolutionize sort of purpose to include sort of essentially to give value to economic or to profitability as well as sustainability, sort of incorporate, embed all of these things and give them equal weight and equal importance. And I think that is the sort of approach that we need to have. And of course, we need to do it very, very carefully, because we know that investors and businesses there is a lot of inertia in terms of their willingness to radicalize sort of, their business model and incorporate sort of circularity into their business model, sort of blindly without having a really good understanding of how to quantify these externalities. I think that segues into what do we classify as value in circularity, because the linear economy or business as usual, value essentially is economic, financial, and that's what matters. And essentially that is actually what caused the downfall of favor, because at the time there were so many economic turmoils, and the victim here, the only thing that could be sacrificed here was the sustainability agenda, because value or economic value was sacrificed. So I think we should have a model that gives both equal importance, and that is able to actually quantify and tokenize value that comes from all of the environmental externalities, that comes from